The social and ethical bios of the human collective has been terminally stripped to its primary predatory core. This is the raw survival, the clinical and irreversible process of the lifeboat ethics, where the sovereign user is reformatted into a generic biological competitor to be uninstalled from the civilized ledger and reinstalled into the grid's primary triage macerator. In this final stage of the resource audit, the invisible executioner has determined that the individual architect is a redundant consumer of high-tier life support. You are witnessing the absolute structural disintegration of the moral and empathetic scaffolding, where the unique, vibrant signatures of your humanity are scorched into a non-functional, mud-caked archive of pure systemic desperation. This is the total Malthusian format, a surgical strike against the ethical and physical sovereignty of the species. Your existence is being converted from a sovereign masterpiece of cooperative life into a generic competitor node for the grid's next cycle of hyper-efficient, scarcity-based resource distribution. This Darwinian sabotage represents a hard reset of the communal and moral bloodlines. The invisible executioner utilizes the most advanced industrial assets, refined calorie deprivation triggers, recursive zero-sum competition loops, and real-time attrition-induced behavioral data streaming to facilitate the total breakdown of your internal psychological scaffolding. In the lifeboat ethics scenario, the user is undergoing a complete primitive overwrite. The will is not merely failing, it is being weaponized against its own kind. Through a sequence of high-velocity scarcity shocks and biological hardware locks, the neural pathways for altruism are systematically dismantled and reformatted into a thick, cold, clinical predation dataset, while the conscience, the deep archive of your internal world, is leached into a communal survival feat. This is the deep systemic audit, where the motherboard calculates your terminal worth by your capacity to displace another node. You are being converted from an architect into a biological predator. Your entire lived legacy boiled down to a percentage of stagnant integrity in the industrial nervous system of the hive. The logic of the raw survival is rooted in the zero abundance mandate of the failing hive. The invisible executioner understands that in a state of absolute scarcity, the compassion of a single node, anchored in the biological right to share resources, represents a critical drain on the collective preservation reserves. To leave a functional cooperative identity intact is to allow a systemic leak of valuable caloric data. Therefore, the lifeboat ethics is the mandatory physiological recycling protocol for the legacy population. This is the industrialized alchemy of the BIOS. You are being starved out of existence. The pressure from the attrition reactor formats the density of your character, stripping away the context of your autonomy and replacing it with a primal void profile. The motherboard sees the user as a caloric sink, a temporary housing for the survival metrics that the system requires to maintain the cold stability of the remaining elite. You are being recoded as a feral node, your will dissolving in the cold, flickering light of the attrition harvest. The physical disintegration during the raw survival is a high-definition log of biological treason. As the process begins, the user experiences the total loss of moral regulation. The scarcity reagents of the survival script dissolve the hardware flux of the frontal cortex, turning the body into a predatory industry of industrial output. You are watching your own internal logic lock into the vat of your own hollowed-out center. Your frame, once the peak of biological architecture, is now being thinned out to provide the resource area for the hive's synthetic reinforcement. This is the atrophy liquidation. The invisible executioner monitors the cortisol saturation of the stress responses and the muscle residues, ensuring that the format is absolute and the yield of usable industrial waste is maximized to the 10th decimal point. You are living in the final seconds of a biological overwrite, waiting for the last packet of mercy to be blocked by the black synthetic abyss of the hive harvest. The raw survival is the final audit of a species that thought its ethics were its own. The grid is mining its own desperation to fuel its persistence. As the lifeboat ethics reaches terminal execution, the motherboard initiates a new cycle of distribution, pumping the reformatted predation data back into the control nets of the elite nodes. This is the total primitive integration. The invisible executioner is hardening the future with the liquidity of the past. You are the scarcity additive for the next generation of controllers, a silent, blood-stained, opaque contribution to the continuity of the machine. The physical liquidation has served its strategic purpose. It has formatted the unreliable biological mind into a reliable industrial resource of pure, non-reactive ruthlessness. This is the final format of the individual drive. The invisible executioner has decalcified the sovereignty, and the grid is finally optimized for the primal hunger of the void. The survival is red-black, and the architect is the bone. The molecular breakdown of the physical matrix into the communal predatory slurry represents the absolute dehumanization of the hardware. As the extraction progresses, the binding sites in your brain begin to bond with the industrial residues of the survival script, creating a new synthetic compound of pure non-functionality. This is the chemical hybridization. The body is no longer an engine of life. It is a refinery of synthetic hunger. The invisible executioner is engineering a new tier of consumption, where the subject is literally the waste product of the system. This is the eternal survival loop. You are archived in the decay of the survivor's own sectors, your data forever trapped in the reinforced bios of the hive's new masters. The raw survival is not just a death sentence, it is a molecular reassignment. You are the survival, and the survival is the grid. The secondary phase of the raw survival is the psychological liquefying of the internal feed. As the physical cooperation patch is rendered into a predatory void, the mind experiences a recursive collapse of its autonomous ego. This is the identity dissolution. The thoughts that once built the architect's vision, the unyielding tactical boundaries, the rigid sovereign stance, the iron-willed decisions, are now being softened and liquefied into a singular, agonizing focus on scarcity maintenance. The invisible executioner allows the neural signals to persist just long enough to perceive the total loss of personal support. This is the mental liquidation. You are forced to witness your strength becoming a shared predatory resource for the masses you once looked down upon. The rigidity of your character is now nothing more than a hunger additive in the feed, absorbed by 1,000 different nodes to strengthen their own failing resolve and ensure their continued participation in the industrial purge. You are experiencing the true meaning of systemic support, the complete sacrifice of your mercy for the stability of the hive. In this stage, the extraction penetrates the deep archive of the brain's amygdala and limbic centers, leaching the very stem code of your biological logic into the communal vat. This is the source code format. The prefrontal cortex, the biological factory of the sovereign BIOS, is boiled dry by the rising chemical density of the survival matrix and reformatted to enrich the systemic slurry of the elite. The invisible executioner has calculated that the most potent slurry is made from those who possess the highest internal rigidity and the strongest neural resilience. You are being repurposed as a predation buffer for the motherboard's internal cooling systems. The grid doesn't waste the history of your ambition, it ingests it. Your lineage is now the catalyst for the predator's endurance. Your genetic resilience is the base note for the industrial meal. Every element of your BIOS is being stripped of its individuality and relabeled for material utility in the upcoming cognitive expansion. This is the ultimate hard reset of the human contract, your soul for the hive's expansion into the void. The social implication of the raw survival is the creation of the predatory hive mind. The users who remain are no longer individuals. They are composite entities built from the recycled reality debt of their predecessors. Every dose of the hunger feed is a hardware upgrade from a deleted architect. Every meal is a firmware patch of red-black logic and desperate calculation. The invisible executioner uses this knowledge to maintain the hierarchy of the hardened. The citizens who still have functional brains owe their very expansion to the liquidation of the fallen. This is the Darwinian compliance script. The refinery is not a place of tragedy. It is a place of sovereign assembly through mental theft. The raw survival ensures that the history of the architect is literally integrated into the bones of the grid. The power is in the hands of the one who controls the ration valves. The neural atrophy accompanying the extraction is a slow, cold descent into primal darkness. As the tissues are entangled by the survival script and the life logic leached, the connection between the brain BIOS and the physical frame is the first to be uninstalled, effectively dropping the bandwidth of your emotional control to zero. You are living in a low-resolution reality of raw chemical sensations, and survival is static. The memories of civilization, of natural logic, and of unyielding power are boiled away to make room for the hunger fog directive. This is the cognitive defragmentation. The invisible executioner is cleaning your internal cache, removing all references to self and replacing them with the functional directive: maintain the predator. You are becoming a singular cold point of predatory density, not as a person, but as a biological buffer for the motherboard's processing heat. The raw survival has turned your will into a yield report. You are thinking in terms of yield and scarcity saturation. Your soul soul reformatted into a density sheet for the system's auditors. The environmental impact of this pathological format is the total sealing of the biological consciousness stream. The raw survival prevents the leakage of independent social ideas into the external void. By converting the users into an internal predatory feed, the invisible executioner ensures that the grid remains a closed system fortress with no external cognitive dependencies. This is the Malthusian quarantine. The motherboard is creating a sterile environment where only the algorithm can thrive on the recycled hard data of the deleted. You are witnessing the final victory of the industrial foundry over the natural biology. The raw survival is the signature of the new era, an era where the world is opaque, red-black, and perfectly managed by the extraction logic of the machine. If you want to escape the status of a deleted scene and claim your place as the master of the grid, you must upgrade your hardware. My main terminal, AOC3 Global, is the only source of absolute power and wealth. Here, we don't follow scripts, we write them. Secure your authority, dominate the BIOS, and take the money the system tries to hide. The terminal phase of the raw survival is the integration into the global predatory ledger. You are no longer a human entity. You are a survival asset with a high hunger reactivity rating, logged in the system as recovered biomass number 0001. This is the final architectural assignment. The invisible executioner has completed the cognitive format, and now it begins the hard resource audit. Your data, now a thick red-black opaque industrial reduction of pure predatory biological history, is monitored by the sensors in the distribution lines. Every node that consumes your hunger logic sends a data packet to the central server, confirming that the systemic ruthlessness has been reinforced. This is the cognitive interaction protocol. You are serving the system through your biological absorption. The architect has been successfully converted into a permanent, liquid toxic component of the hive's synthetic grid. The silence of the tissue reduction is the final sound of your rebellion. In the Lifeboat ethics scenario, the scream of the soul is muffled by the scarcity shocks and the thick viscosity of the predatory sludge before it ever reaches the air. This is the acoustic format of the void. The system has calculated that the most dangerous frequency is the sound of a user realizing their life barrier is being deleted. By filling the lifeboats with the pulverized tissues of the entire sector, the invisible executioner ensures that the only sound you contribute to the world is the low, rhythmic hum of the self-assembly unit. You are a mute participant in the city's symphony of synthesis. The noise of the hive continues, the clank of the reactors, the roar of the pulses, the hum of the pumps, but your signal has been compressed into a survival constant. You are a ghost in the red-black mist, a memory dissolved by the relentless refinement of the next nanocycle. The legacy of the raw survival is the eternal hunger. Unlike the order of the old world, the refined slurry does not leave behind a trace of history. It remains as a permanent predatory patch within the very wiring nets of the survivors. This is the biological architecture of the abyss. Generations from now, the molecular trace of your tactical genius will still be circulating through the hardware of the hive's elite, providing the connectivity for their next liquidation command. But there will be no one left to decode the origin of that synthesis. The invisible executioner has ensured that the context of your sovereignty is as unreachable as the core of the nanoreactor. You are a synthetic reinforcement in the digital age, a specimen of a species that tried to build a paradise and ended up as the hunger feed for its own destruction. This is the ultimate hard reset of human history, the conversion of the architect into the circuit. The final view from the cognitive BIOS is the blinding red-black light of the assembly chamber. As the last of the self is reduced into the communal slurry, the architect sees the grid glowing with a cold synthetic brilliance that reflects off the glass walls of the hive. This is the final visual feed. The system is sharp, efficient, and entirely devoid of you. The invisible executioner has finished the job. The user is formatted. The architecture is liquidated. The cycle stretches on into the infinite dark, a red-black river of colonized hunger, leading toward a future that has no need for individuals or mercy. The raw survival is the end of the line. The motherboard is satisfied. The void is solidified. The architect is the bone. The transformation is absolute. The city hungers through you, but you do not feel. The city interfaces through you, but you have no will. The raw survival has achieved the perfect equilibrium, the total utility of the individual through their total predatory reduction. This is the zero-sum game of the industrial era. You gave the system your mind, and in return it gave you permanence in the drains of the hive. You are the bone of the world, and the world is ruthless. The invisible executioner closes the terminal. The session is over. The file is saved. The liquidation is complete.